At the dawn of the new millennium, feature-length animation was in the transitional period. For about 10 years, Disney had completely dominated animation during what we now call the Disney Renaissance. Under the leadership of Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, Walt Disney Animation Studios pulled itself out of the dark ages of the 1980s and created one of the greatest runs in movie history. Starting in 1989 and basically running through the end of the 90s, Disney released an unbelievable string of hits. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King. These weren't just successful anime movies, these were cultural events. They dominated the box office, they dominated VHS sales, they dominated merchandise aisles, theme parks, soundtracks, Broadway adaptations, Happy Meals, everything. Disney animation basically became the gold standard of family entertainment. Some later Renaissance films, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Hercules, underperformed compared to the gigantic expectations created by earlier hits. Now to be clear, these movies were not flops, business was still very good. But audiences were beginning to get a little tired of the formula, and honestly you could kind of see why. The Disney template had become extremely recognizable. An animated fairy tale, Broadway-style musical numbers, comic relief sidekick voiced by a famous comedian, a big emotional ballad, a villain song, animal companions. People still liked it, but it no longer felt new. At the same time, another revolution was brewing. In 1995, a little computer company formerly owned by George Lucas released the first fully computer animated feature film ever made, Toy Story. And it was a massive success. Now, Disney was smart enough to already have a distribution agreement with Pixar, so they still benefited financially from this new technology. But the writing was on the wall, animation was changing. Meanwhile, competition was brewing everywhere. After leaving Disney under, let's just say, very messy circumstances, Jeffrey Katzenberg teamed up with David Geffen and Steven Spielberg to create DreamWorks Pictures. And because Katzenberg absolutely wanted to compete directly with Disney, DreamWorks also launched its own animation studio, which honestly feels a little bit like opening a Spite store directly across the street from your old employer. Their first animated feature was Ants, a movie about talking ants, starring beloved comedian Woody Allen. Nothing problematic there. Released just weeks before Pixar's A Bug's Life. So yes, this was absolutely personal. These newer animated films were different from Disney's house style. They were edgier, faster, and more sarcastic. They used celebrity voices heavily. They focused more on jokes and attitude than Broadway songs and fairy tale sincerity. Adults could connect with them differently. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, DreamWorks was struggling through production on a little movie called Shrek. And once Shrek exploded in popularity, it completely changed the game. Suddenly making fun of Disney became the new trend. So with computer animation rising, and audiences' tastes changing, what were all the classically trained 2D animators supposed to do? Well, they decided to make giant, ambitious, weird science fiction passion projects. And that maybe did not go according to plan. I'm Gabagooltube, and this is the death of 2D animation in space. If you look at Hollywood during this period, basically every major studio wants its own animation division. Because Disney had proven how insanely valuable anime movies could be, this wasn't just about theatrical revenue anymore. A successful anime film became an entire ecosystem. VHS sales, toys, fast food tie-ins, TV spin-offs, theme park rides, clothing, video games. The money never stopped. So naturally, every studio executive in Hollywood wanted a piece of that pie. One of the most obvious challengers would have been Warner Brothers. And honestly, on paper, they seemed perfectly positioned to compete with Disney. They had the Looney Tunes characters. They'd acquired the entire Hanna-Barbera catalog. They launched Cartoon Network, the first 24-hour cartoon channel. Animation was already in their DNA. So in the 90s, Warner Bros. Feature animation started taking big swings. Their early success was Space Jam, which mixed live-action animation similar to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Only instead of actor Bob Hoskins carrying the movie, they had Michael Jordan, a man who was very good at basketball and not exactly known for acting. To be fair to MJ, he basically was standing alone on green screens talking to tennis balls half the time. And honestly, the Looney Tunes characters do most of the heavy lifting anyway. But the movie worked. It became a modest hit, an absolute millennial childhood staple. Even if, objectively, it's kind of ridiculous. But Warner Bros. Tried building momentum from here. They released Quest from Camelot, which was very clearly attempting to imitate the Disney formula. That movie bombed. But their next project was something special, The Iron Giant, directed by future Pixar legend Brad Bird. And this movie was incredible. No musical numbers, heavy Cold War themes, existential ideas about violence and humanity, huge science fiction action sequences. It was emotional, mature, and smart. And audiences completely ignored it. Released in the very crowded summer of 1999, The Iron Giant became a box office disaster despite universal critical acclaim. And this is where you start seeing a pattern emerge. American audiences at the time just did not seem ready for ambitious animated science fiction films, especially hand-drawn ones. Now thankfully, The Iron Giant eventually became a beloved classic through home video and cable television. Today it's considered one of the greatest animated films ever made, but at the time, it was viewed as a failure. And honestly, Brad Bird is incredibly lucky that he had connections at Pixar afterward, because without that, who knows what would have happened to his directing career. Instead, he goes on to make The Incredibles and Ratatouille, becomes one of the biggest animation directors alive. Before the 90s had even ended, we already had one warning sign. A giant, ambitious sci-fi animated film had failed. Meanwhile, Toy Story 2 was one of the biggest movies of the year. That contrast matters. Then we move over to 20th Century Fox. Now, younger viewers might forget this, but before Disney bought them, Fox was a major studio powerhouse, and they already had enormous success in television animation. The Simpsons, King of the Hill, Futurama, and Family Guy. Plus their Fox Kids programming block was huge in the 90s. So Fox wanted to expand further into feature animation, and they partnered with legendary animator Don Bluth. Bluth had already spent years competing with Disney after leaving the company in the 80s. Together they released Anastasia, which honestly feels so Disney-coded that many people today probably assume it was a Disney movie. And because Anastasia did reasonably well, Fox gave Bluth the freedom to go bigger. Much bigger, which led to Titan AE. Now this movie is fascinating. Unlike the Iron Giant, Titan AE never fully crossed into universally beloved masterpiece status. It definitely has a cult following. I personally kind of love it, but it never escaped its reputation as a gigantic flop. And when I say flop, I mean catastrophic flop. The movie performed so badly that it shut down Fox Animation Studios entirely. And Don Bluth has not directed another feature film since. What's interesting is that Titan AE was maybe too intense for the audience it was targeting. I vividly remember the trailers as a kid. The imagery of Earth literally exploding while aliens wiped out humanity was genuinely terrifying, and the movie itself is weirdly dark for a PG animated film. So you ended up with this awkward middle ground, too scary for little kids, too cartoonish for many adults, and most teenagers at the time were probably just going to go see X-Men that summer. It's one of those movies where you kind of ask, who exactly was this made for? In many ways, Titan AE feels like Fox's version of the Black Cauldron. An ambitious dark fantasy or sci-fi gamble that pushed too far outside the comfort zone of family animation. Except in this case, the gamble destroyed an entire animation studio. After shutting down Fox Animation Studios, Fox partnered with Blue Sky Studios. And suddenly they found massive success with simpler, broader CG at family comedies like Ice Age. And again, audiences had spoken. Now let's get back to DreamWorks. Because DreamWorks was learning a similar lesson. Their CG films were thriving. Ants did well. Shrek became an absolute cultural nuclear bomb, but their hand-drawn animated movies, not so much. The Prince of Egypt performed decently and became beloved over time, but then came films like The Road to El Dorado and Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. Critical respect, sort of, a little bit, but very weak box office. So naturally DreamWorks decided, you know what we should do next? A giant hand-drawn action adventure movie, which led to Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. And Sinbad absolutely cratered. The movie bombed so badly that DreamWorks abandoned traditional hand-drawn animation afterward. And not only that, the financial damage nearly destroyed the studio itself. People forget how unstable DreamWorks actually was during this period. Within 2 years, the company sold itself to Paramount Pictures. Again, audiences were simply not showing up for these edgy, hand-drawn action-adventure animated films, at least not in America. Now, before we get to Disney, I want to quickly shout out a few other weird cases from this era. Paramount Pictures actually played things relatively safe. Instead of building a giant prestige animation studio, they mostly adapted their successful television cartoons into movies. And honestly, that strategy worked pretty well. From MTV, they had Beavis and Butthead Do America. From Comedy Central, they had South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. And at Nickelodeon, they had the Rugrats movie and the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. These films had built-in audiences already. But not every TV adaptation worked. Movies like the Wild Thornberrys movie and Hey Arnold the movie struggled. Still, Paramount never overcommitted to giant prestige animation gambles the way other studios did, which honestly might have saved them a lot of pain, and probably put them in the position to buy DreamWorks. Then there's one of the strangest failures of the entire era, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Now, unlike the other movies we've discussed, this one was fully CGI, and at the time it looked unbelievably realistic. Like, genuinely shocking for 2001. Square Pictures was formed specifically to make the film. Sony Pictures gave it a massive marketing push. It had a PG-13 rating. It was dark, serious, philosophical, and audiences rejected it completely. Part of the problem was probably the uncanny valley effect, that the characters looked almost human, but not quite, which made the whole movie feel weirdly unsettling. And also it had almost nothing to do with the actual Final Fantasy games people loved, so fans were confused. Kids weren't interested, adults weren't interested, and once again, a massive animated science fiction gamble exploded financially. The movie failed so badly that Square Pictures shut down completely, and Square itself was suddenly in real financial danger. Luckily for them, they also released Final Fantasy X around the same time, which became a huge success. And eventually they merged with Enix to form Square Enix, so they survived. Years later, Sony eventually found enormous success in animation through Sony Pictures Animation with franchises like Hotel Transylvania and the incredible Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now finally we have the big dog, Disney. While Pixar was thriving, Walt Disney Animation Studios was having an identity crisis. The traditional musical fairy tale formula wasn't hitting the same anymore, so Disney decided to pivot. And the pivot was sci-fi. In 2001, Disney released Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Then in 2002, Treasure Planet. Both were massive, expensive passion projects from Disney's top creative talent. Atlantis came from Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise, the directors of Beauty and the Beast. Treasure Planet was the dream project of Ron Clements and John Musker, the legendary duo behind The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Hercules. These were not B teams, these were Disney Animation's all-stars, and both movies failed hard. Now personally, I think Treasure Planet especially rules. The visual style still looks fantastic, the blend of hand-drawn animation CGI was incredibly ambitious, but audiences didn't connect with it, at least not theatrically, and Treasure Planet's failure in particular became a turning point. Disney began shutting down much of its traditional 2D pipeline shortly afterward. Yes, Lilo and Stitch succeeded earlier that same year, but it wasn't enough to offset the damage. Disney still released a few more traditionally animated movies afterward, Brother Bear and Home on the Range, but the momentum was gone. And eventually Disney fully pivoted towards CGI. What's fascinating though is how many of these movies have since been reclaimed by younger audiences. Atlantis, Treasure Planet, Titan AE, and The Iron Giant. These movies have passionate fan bases now. You can find countless video essays defending them right here on YouTube, because they represent something unique. A weird experimental period where the studios were taking gigantic swings. And honestly, I kind of miss that. Plenty of modern anime movies are still great, but there's definitely a certain sameness to the current landscape sometimes. Ask random people on the street whether a CGI anime movie came from Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, or Illumination, and many genuinely could not tell you. The house styles have blurred together. I mean, look at Zootopia. I'm sure plenty of people would think that was a Pixar film, but no, that was Disney proper. Meanwhile, the late 90s and early 2000s gave us this bizarre era where studios were pouring insane amounts of money into strange sci-fi epics that barely fit traditional family entertainment molds. Some kind of worked, but most absolutely did not. But they were memorable, and visually adventurous, and risky. There was genuine experimentation happening. I especially think Titan AE and Treasure Planet deserve another look if you've never seen them. Their attempts to combine traditional hand-drawn animation with CGI still hold up surprisingly well, and their action sequences remain incredibly inventive. There's just something about sci-fi animation that studios can't resist, even though it repeatedly destroys them financially. Because even today, you could still see this pattern happening. Pixar, the once untouchable kings of animation, recently struggled badly with sci-fi films like Lightyear and Elio. And I kinda understand why those movies failed. Neither really had a strong enough hook to pull general audiences in. Meanwhile, Brad Bird found huge success by grounding sci-fi concepts inside a much broader superhero family premise with The Incredibles. That's a much easier sell. Superhero family movie is instantly understandable. And speaking of Brad Bird, another fascinating test is coming soon. Bird's long gestating passion project, Ray Gun, is finally expected to release through Netflix. This is a sci-fi noir concept he's apparently been developing since before The Iron Giant. Yes, it's Netflix, so it won't really get the full theatrical treatment these earlier movies had, but it'll still be interesting to see whether audiences connect with another ambitious animated sci-fi story from one of the masters of the medium. Because history shows that's always been a dangerous gamble. What are your thoughts on these movies? Which ones did you grow up with? And do you think Hollywood lost something when hand-drawn animation faded away? Let me know in the comments. Once again, I'm GabaGhoulTube, and thanks for watching.